Hey, I'm Dr. Jones. I'm a pediatrician specializing in Black health and wellness, and today we're going to be talking about autism. Autism is a really scary diagnosis for a lot of parents. Sometimes parents feel like if their child is diagnosed with autism, then they won't be able to live a full life in the future. And I'm here to tell you that that's not necessarily true. So autism, contrary to popular belief, is not caused by vaccinations. Researchers have found that there is a large genetic component to autism. It's not entirely genetic. There have been cases where a parent who has autism then has a child who has autism, which lets us know that there is a hereditary component. Now, sometimes the parent might not have autism, but may have a gene that will cause autism. And there are things in the environment that can make that gene come on in the child, and so the child will then show signs and symptoms of autism. Autism is usually diagnosed when the child is between 18 months and 24 months. Diagnosing autism sooner than that is pretty difficult because the kid is still developing, and so it can be challenging to determine if the kid might, let's say, just have a speech delay versus whether they have full-blown autism. But at 18 months of age, your kid should be talking, they should be walking, they should be socializing. And so these are the three common things that we look at to determine whether or not your kid is at risk for autism. The reason why it might seem that the vaccines are causing autism or that your child develops autism after receiving vaccines is because your child can only be diagnosed at 18 months of age at the earliest. And so that coincides with the time in the vaccine schedule when the child will receive their MMR vaccine and their varicella vaccines. But there's been no proof that there is a causative relationship between vaccination and development of autism. Once your pediatrician has a suspicion of autism, they should refer you to a developmental pediatrician who can do an extensive assessment, which includes observing your child for a prolonged period of time, much longer than your pediatrician has to observe your child during their well-child checkup. But only with the evaluation of a developmental pediatrician can your child be formally diagnosed with autism. I've seen that a lot of schools are now diagnosing kids with autism in order to get them into special education. I'm here to tell you that the assessment that the school does is very different from the assessment that is performed in the developmental pediatrician's office. And so if your child's school is saying that they might have autism, I would strongly encourage you to have them evaluated by a medical professional. Once your kid is medically diagnosed with autism, they actually qualify for a lot of services. If you're in the DC area, kids who are diagnosed with autism qualify for a special type of insurance called HSCSN. That's the Health Services for Children with Special Needs. And through that program, they're able to get access to speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and even behavioral therapy. Those services are essential to improving long-term prognosis of autism for your child, and the earlier they start receiving those services, the better their outcomes. However, private insurance companies and standard Medicaid insurance usually does not cover those services, and so it can be much more difficult for your child to start receiving them, and it can be really expensive. Here are some signs to look for if you're wondering if your child might have autism. And all of these signs should be present together. So if you notice that your child doesn't often make eye contact, or they don't respond to their name, they don't say many words initiating conversation, they only repeat words that they hear in songs or on television, or they mimic what you're saying but don't initiate any words on their own, these are signs of autism. If your child tends not to interact with other people in their environment, so let's say a new person walks into the room, if your child doesn't even notice that person has entered their environment, that's another sign that they might be autistic. Some other common things that we see is that kids like to line their blocks up, or they line up their cars, or they're not playing in an imaginative way. And so those are all signs that your child might be autistic. So if you see any of those signs in your toddler, then please bring them up to your pediatrician and advocate for them to have a formal assessment and diagnosis potentially.